Hello.
Oh, hey, is that Mark?
This is Mark.
Welcome to Season 3 of the FNRad Snowboard Podcast.
Okay, perfect. 1 second, please.
Tala in ett meddelande efter tonen.
Hi, this is Sean. I'm not here right now.
You have reached Mike.
Hi, this is Jim. Leave me a message, and I will call you back as soon as I can.
Hi, you've reached Jeremy Jones.
Yeah, I'm going to call you back in 10. Sorry, dude.
Hey, listeners. Welcome back to the FNRad Snowboarding Podcast, the show where we talk to interesting snowboarders, guys like Mark Fawcett, who dominated racing in the early 90s and right up until the Olympics in Nagano, Japan, 98. He was favored to win, actually. It's a pretty cool story. You'll hear it in the show. Mark is like true Canadian snowboarding royalty, even though he trained for most of his career in the States. Anyways, let's just get to the show. Here's the interview. We haven't had any racers on, or actually Mike Jacoby.
Yeah. Oh, Jacoby was definitely Yeah, he was full on. You know, Mike was a force through the whole 90s, and then I was getting in there here and there in the early and mid 90s, and then more towards the late 90s.
That was
my little heyday.
Yeah, little is an understatement as far as one of the most winning snowboarders of that era. That's you. As someone who didn't care for racing at all, you were still on the radar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you'd hear a couple of racers' names, and you were definitely at the top of the game when I was paying attention to any kind of competition stuff. I'd like to start with, what was the first board that you rode?
So the first board I rode was actually a snurfer of sorts, wooden, with staples covered over it. It was sitting at a condo we rented at Sugarloaf, and we couldn't tell if it was a decoration or like legit go use it, but I can tell you we had it out. And preceding that, really, like the thing that got me super amped on in snowboarding would have been about 83, 84, was the segment of the film with Ted Shred. I forget, he was in France or whatever, and he was bombing past the skiers, you know, with the laser beam soundtrack going and taking them out, and
totally,
you know, it just looked like the most amazing sensation ever. And I was a skier, you know, lifelong young skier, ski racer, really into windsurfing. But anyway, that led to a Sims Lonnie Toft was my first board I owned.
Wow.
And I remember, so I bought it from this, I guess you'd call him an alternative punky dude in New Brunswick, Nelson Hansen. Hats off to him. And he worked at Le Chateau at the time, which was hilarious. And I remember walking. I was probably 12, and I walked in. I got my grandfather to buy me a case of beer, because that was the deal. I could get this snowboard for a case of beer. And I remember walking through the mall, 12 years old, with a case of beer. Walked into Le Chateau, dropped it on the counter, and Nelson gave me the board from behind the counter.
That's amazing.
And what was funny is, as with, I think, a lot of them, it came with sky hooks instead of full foot straps. And I said, what's with the, you know, half thing going on here? Like, why would you, you know, and coming from, you know, early days of windsurfing where we actually had foot straps on the board, he's like, oh, man, like, when shit goes wrong in the air, etc., like, you know, you got to pull your feet together and bail out. Like, you got to be able to bail. And I was like, huh, really? And I tried it for a whole winter like that, and you could do it, but it's completely unnecessary. And then, as with just about any other snowboarder out there in the early days, the modifications began. And so we tried with windsurf foot straps, but they weren't big enough to go over Sorels. And then we got fire hose material, seemed to be like the ticket. And then it was fire hose and bungee straps to like keep your heels in. And yeah. So
That's
those were my first experiences, all on golf courses. That board was useless on a groomer. So just little back hilly golf course style stuff. That was sort of my first, you know, fall in love with and first experience snowboarding.
That's incredible. So at 12, was there a sense that this was going to be a big part of your life?
Purely recreational.
Mm-hmm.
Big passion for it, but purely recreational. Mm-hmm. I knew at some point, hey, when I'm older, you know, maybe I'll be lucky enough to like go to one of those open powder fields with it or something like Ted Shred, you know,
mm-hmm.
or with whatever comes up. But it spooled up pretty quick. So, you know, that led to a Burton Elite 140 with fins, and I took it to family ski vacation at Banff.
Oh, wow.
And I was just determined to get that thing rocking. And so I'm from New Brunswick. Those golf courses and backcountry stuff, that's in roly-poly stuff, you know?
Yeah.
You know, I definitely, it was my first time going to the snowboard shop and meeting Ken.
Cool.
And he was a great help. And he was one of the guys that said, "Oh, take those side fins off. Those things are terrible." On the Burton. And there were a few locals out at Sunshine. I'm sure it was notables, a little older than myself. And that really opened my eyes to like, oh my God, like, look at what you can do on these things. It's pretty amazing. And that was 85 or 86, 85.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know that you went to school in New England somewhere, right? With Jeremy Jones. Was that quite a bit later, post high school, or was that kind of in lieu of high school?
Exactly. So fast forward a little bit, a few boards later, then all of a sudden competition on snowboards getting hot. They're racing them for lack of knowing what else to do on a snowboard. Mm-hmm. And I got into it. And so every weekend I was going down to New England and competing in these New England Cup events with Jason Ford, Noah Brandon, Todd Richards,
Wow.
From my standpoint, just a bunch of other kids,
Yeah.
A lot of those dudes were just like a year or two older than me, not much. And I would do okay. I wasn't doing bad against them, but they snowboarded every day, and I was only snowboarding on the weekends. So I looked into it, and I knew about this Carrabassett Valley Academy, hardcore ski race school. Like if you were a top-notch ski race kid, you went there, and then you got to eat, sleep, breathe ski racing and complete school. So I begged and pleaded with them, and they actually hung up on me the first time. I said, "Hey, look, I want to come down. Do you have a snowboard program?" They said, "No, no one has one of those. Sorry, thanks a lot." And Vicki Robinson hung up, and then I called her back, and I'm like, whoa, hold on. Like, let me get my foot in the door here. And this would have been, when I was 17 and wanting to go there as a senior in high school. And I said, let me come down there and give me a chance here. So I went down there on their, April break or something, and met with them, and they're like, all right, probationary only. Like, if this doesn't work out, you're out of here, and you can start next fall. In that time frame, Warren Cook, the mountain manager, he was really good friends with the Joneses, and said, hey, there's a snowboarder going to a ski academy, first one ever. Send Jeremy up, because I know how much he loves snowboarding. And I remember Jeremy's mom, Linda, calling me up, and she's like, Jer's really good at hockey. She's like, he's so good at hockey. Are you sure about this snowboard?
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, send him up. Sounds like a cool kid. And he would have been going into grade 9, 13, 14, something like that. We could do a whole interview about just like, the first time meeting young Jonesy. And anyway, we had a blast. I mean, right away we were sort of shining on the hill. That was the year, so 89, around 88, 89. If you remember the old Burton movie with Peter Bauer just making the most gorgeous turns you've ever seen.
You turn. That one.
Yeah, that segment.
Yeah.
That segment. And there was one little particular moment where he was swinging his arms around a lot. I mean, that whole fruity Euro thing, easy to be the general after the war and, and rip on it now.
Yeah.
But anyway, just the dynamics of it, I was just blown away. I was like, oh my God, like we got to figure out how to like turn like that. So by early December, we were making pencil line carves, on our hard boots or soft boots at Sugarloaf, and all of a sudden it was like, wow, like these two young snowboard guys are making better turns than any of the ski racers there. Like,
nice.
What the hell's going on?
Right.
There was almost a little animosity behind it,
Skis are still they were really, really long with really, really huge side cuts. So
exactly. And like a ton of camber and everything. Like, you couldn't make them more challenging to use, really. Like, they're just terrible. And the boards, like, just God bless everyone who, like, in those early days started figuring it out. Wow, like.
So who is
coaching
you there? Like, so you call them and say, do you have a snowboard program? They say no, and you convince them to do it, but who is teaching you guys how to, like, who has a program?
Yeah. So, the deal was, I said, look, I can just train with the skiers. I race the same courses. Half pipe I can train on my own. I skate. So actually, funny enough, that first Lonnie Toft Sims board I had, the skateboard deck on top became my first skateboard. So I was skating vert ramps and, doing all that by this era. And no one had half pipe coaches, Right. I mean, most of the snowboarders didn't even have coaches. I really wasn't that concerned about that. I kind of knew I needed the environment and I needed the miles and access to it. And right when we got there, they're like, well, someone's going to have to watch over you guys. So I had a young teacher there who happened to be my physics teacher. I was the only kid that took physics at the school. I was valedictorian. There were only 4 grade 12. There were only four people there in senior year. So he took on the role of sort of like traveling around with us around the New England Cup. Anyway, so we had a little bit of supervision. And I tell you, like, so passionate about it, so in love with snowboarding. So the school was sort of designed, you trained not every day. They really wanted you taking, I think it was Sundays or Mondays off. They're like, you need a day off. And the rest of the time you would train all morning and do school in the afternoons. And on Mondays, I think we had study hall or something like that in the mornings. And Jonesy and I'd sneak up to the mountain. I remember, I had an old Subaru, and I'd actually drive, standard, a stick, and I would drive up there with my hard boots on, and we'd go up just for even 2 or 3 runs, and we just couldn't get enough of it. And it was funny, to see, because some of the ski race kids, grade 10, grade 11, they were already burnt out on it. Mm-hmm. Like, they were already like, oh God, do I have to go up and train today? Oh, it's cold. It wasn't really the case with Jonesy and I. Like, needless to say, they were really stoked on the snowboard program right away. And I guess just because they had I was pretty ADHD hyper kid, and Jeremy was just so talented. We did great that year. So Jeremy raced, there was actually age divisions within that New England Cup, and he raced the youth, which I think is U15, U16, and he just crushed everyone, like, pretty much the whole time. And I raced pro, actually, with Jason and Noah and all those dudes. And, by that year, then I started doing well. Then I started getting on the podium with those guys and such. And that was the thing I really liked about snowboarding then. You could do everything on it. One weekend they'd have a slalom and a moguls. The next weekend they'd have a GS and a half pipe. And you just did every discipline. I loved, actually, funny enough, I loved moguls back.
I could not get moguls to work for me. For me, it was just about gapping from one to the other, and it just seemed so dangerous.
It takes a lot of core strength. I mean, it's like it's exhausting, And I've always just been a competitive person, competitive kid. I had way too much confidence for my skills in everything back when I was a kid. Very little humility. I must have been a total pain in the ass to hang out with. But
it's good that I just heard that from Kelly Joe about Craig. He was so focused and so driven that a lot of people would have just been like, no, I don't want to hang out with that guy.
Yeah.
Which to me is crazy, because I met him when he was older and a lot more mellow. And his passion for snowboarding and design. I moved out west in 93 and saw him at Baker a few times and just was blown away by, it'd be raining. He'd still be out there just carving around, going super fast, riding unbelievably styly. And just, he was available. When we were talking to him, he was present and cool. So you must have competed against him quite a bit in those early days, because he was taking it serious. I
really just had the 1 year. So after this whole Carabasset Valley Academy thing, which was just fantastic, really, I went to Mount Hood late that summer to go train. I was going to train with some of the K2 dudes. Yeah. Ended up running into Noah Brandon, who was training with Jerry Masterpool, Cross M, big, race brand and everything. And Mike Jacoby was training with him. Basically, luckily, stumbled onto that squad. That year of 90-91 was my first year on the big stage, and I had some success, and I got to compete against Craig every weekend, and it was amazing. I mean, we had a full tour, and there was actually 2 different tour bodies, but still, we had a full schedule. Yeah, it was great. And same thing though, I kept doing half pipe till about 95, I think.
What was your best placing? Did you ever do pretty good?
At one of the pro events, I got 5th.
Awesome.
Yeah, so we had a morning qualifier, two run qualifier, and if you were in the top 4 or 5, you went automatically to finals. And I did it. I got it. I got through. JCJ and I both got through.
Nice.
And Brushy and Todd Richards had to actually do the second run. We were so stoked. It was an Aspen,
awesome.
Actually. Yeah. Anyway. Oh, so competing against Craig, yeah. And so there was actually one event, Super G, at Copper Mountain, and I won it. So it was my first big victory and everything. And I was, I remember talking to my coach after, and I was like, I feel bad. I'm not really supposed to be beating Craig. What do I do? What do I say to him? Because he was still, then I was 19. He still kind of had him on a pedestal.
Sure.
Not the rest of them. And I trained with Jacoby, so I knew him well. I was able to kick the pedestal out from under him pretty politely in my mind. He's a sparring partner now. Now we're good.
Exactly.
Now we're, It was kind of a humbling experience actually doing that. And I mean, most of the time, the rest of the year, he just killed me and everyone else,
right,
you know, in everything. And he was really focusing on pipe that year too. And he won Baker that year. It was the only year we had it as a Baker was not an open event. It was a pro tour event.
Oh wow!
And he really pulled that one out. So
that's pretty awesome. So as we're rolling into 90, let's say 94, there was a demonstration of snowboarding at the Olympics. Is that right?
If there was, it was local and small. God forbid, I would have even done Albertville if they had that, which would have been 92.
Yeah.
And that's when they decided that, okay, we're going to alternate summer and winter games. There's no sense in having winters that winter and summers that following summer. It makes sense to alternate. Yeah. So to create the alternation, they did 92 games at Albertville and they did 94 in Littlehammer.
Okay, right.
Just 2 years later. And again, if there was anything, it would have just been a little something there. Certainly wasn't a big organized event or anything. So 98 was really, and there was a big moment in there worth discussing where the ski race community came in, where the FIS came in and such. And also even, that first year I did the tour, 90-91, everyone was doing everything still. And I loved it. Yeah. I loved doing pipe, and I loved that, Hetzel was racing that year. Yeah. But you could tell, him and Brushy. Brushy was a great racer.
Really?
And, oh, yeah. He was really good. He just really didn't give a shit about it.
Yeah.
You could tell, and it started that year where it was like, you saw it coming. And then so by 91, 92, there were racers and there were freestylers.
Yeah.
And there were a few of us that really liked doing both. So again, like JCJ, myself, like Apollo Dabini, like a few people where it's like, we still love riding pipe, Yeah. But the primary focus was racing. And for me, the other thing, I just loved watching snowboard movies and, again, going back in my head to that Ted Shred thing, like in the springtime, like I really wanted to put forth an effort to like go ride big mountains and ride powder and fulfill that sensational dream. And so lucky, Sim Snowboards was just fantastic. Malcolm really did, unite me up with that. Malcolm Norman, who you've met.
I'm his mailman, which is so weird.
All right.
I don't even know how we started talking about it. He's like, I signed Noah. And I was like, what? So
Absolutely.
Who were you riding for pre-Sims?
I was on K2.
K2.
I was on K2. On a really loose, pretty much like a verbal contract.
Sure.
And I did well that first 90-91 season, and Malcolm was at Sims, and Malcolm's an old friend from New Brunswick. So he's like, come on over. And it was great. And they were super supportive. Tom was really cool. I really miss that guy. He was awesome. So I was like, I want to go on this trip to Greenland. And then that would bring in to play that, the sort of iconic photo of me and John Egan. And they're like, all right, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, it's gonna cost like $6,000, $7,000, They're like, okay, sure. And they did it. Yeah, great investment, But so I got to go to places like that. I got to do some Alaska trips. I'd go in the spring on my own, even just to Utah or wherever, and experience the full spectrum.
Did you get to go to Jackson Hole pretty early on?
Oh yeah, and with Jeremy. And I remember Jeremy and I hung out a lot from CVA, and he was on Cross M with us. So we had him on Cross M about 2 years after I graduated, and he was on Cross M all the way through to 98, to 10 days before the Olympics. There's another whole story. You should get in touch with Adam Hostetter, because that's a great story.
Yeah, I will for sure.
Oh yeah, Jackson Hole, amazing. And I remember staying, on the floor with his brothers. We were talking about getting tickets. He's like, yeah, we can get you comp tickets. Just tell him, TGR. And I'm like, what? He's like, Teton Gravity Research. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, we just fired it up, man. Like making a movie, and we're working with this lady, and da-da-da-da-da. Yeah, I got some great, beautiful days in Jackson, and actually had some really fun filming with Richard Chesky there. Classic dude. We filmed Christmas Day 94 there. A beautiful day. The TGR guys were out as well, and we all sort of went out together and did stuff and hit this cliff, and it was probably the best cliff line I've ever done.
Nice.
And they're like, yeah, we got this new kid, Colorado, out here, and ride with him. And he was ripping. It was really good. And it was Seth Morrison in his infancy, which was funny and cool. Yeah.
All right, I'm just going to interrupt here and tell you about our sponsors. You already know who they are. Wired Snowboards is Rob Dow's company out of Vancouver, BC. They make great boards. Go to wiredsnowboards.com and check them out. I've been riding my 57 Directive all this week, and guess what? Rob's going to let me keep it, so I'm hyped. Send Rob a little note, like his stuff on Facebook, like his stuff on Instagram. Let him know that you heard about Wired Snowboarding through the podcast. That would be rad if you could do that for me. Thank you very much. Also, use offer code FNRad at checkout, buy a Wired snowboard, and save 10%. Also, we've got the Boardroom Snowboard Shop backing us up. It's a place I worked for 13 years. Murray Fraser's the owner. He's also very cool. Vancouver-based retailer that ships to Canada and the United States, offers the best performance, the lowest price, the best selection of stuff. I've said it so many times, but it's really true. It's a great shop to buy your stuff from. And if you use offer code FNRAD5 or FNRAD10 at checkout, you save 5% off on sale stuff or 10% off on regular price stuff. Go to theboardroomshop.com. And now let's go back to the show.
I had great confidence it wouldn't be a problem qualifying. My thing, I was sort of on our side of snowboarders should control snowboarding.
Mm-hmm.
I totally got why Terrier said, nah, I don't want to go. I don't want to go because of this. I don't want to go because it's a bunch of skiers in Switzerland trying to control our sport.
Right.
He didn't have a bad point. Leading up to, and when he made that announcement, he was the best half-pipe rider in the world. Within a year of the Olympics, the level went up. Yeah, so I wouldn't say I even had mixed feelings. I was like, okay, I'm going to go. I'll do this. But I really struggled competing at the FIS events from a perspective of like wanting to support it. And I won a few of them, and that's what we needed to do was go in and win a couple. So you had enough FIS points to like qualify and everything. I could see the allure. A lot of people switched sides, and they went with the FIS and like jumped on that tour, and it hurt our tour. And we had a fatality in our tour, actually. Oh no, that was after 98. Sorry.
Yeah.
But that was the nail in our coffin, and that was the old ISF, so I was super pro ISF, and we had the PSAs, which are the Pro Snowboard Associations. And we tried to really have the snowboarders and the snowboard union, which is the PSA, control and run snowboarding. And we were close, but we really just didn't have our shit together enough compared to, or the money and the purchase power that FIS had. They threw so much money at it. Starting in 95, it was unbelievable how much money they threw at it and how much control they had over resorts and regions. And the IOC board of directors and the FIS board of directors were almost synonymous.
Yeah.
So there was no way we were going to win that battle.
So was there a Canadian coach for the Canadian team even at that point?
I was still fiercely loyal to Cross M, my old
is
coach.
In the States.
Yeah, but he ended up being our main Canadian coach. He coached JC and I, and we were both, we were like the top two guys in the qualifiers and on the FIS list and everything. I actually went in with a full loaded 1,000 points. Average your best two results. To win an event, you get 1,000 points. So myself and Nicolas Comte from France, we were tied for the top ranking going into the games or whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was a really small organization, Canada Snowboard then, or the Canadian Snowboard Federation. Yeah, and they were basically just like, hey, Mark, who do you... I'm like, yeah, just, my coach, Jerry. Get him a ticket and get him a costume, and we're off. Okay. I mean, it was that simple. There was absolutely nothing to it.
But he would have been Jacoby's coach as well at that point.
Jacoby had jumped off Cross M by about 93 or 4, and he switched to FIS. And I don't blame him. Everyone makes decisions, and he ended up jumping on a ship that had better longevity. Actually.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this, but when he left Burton, he never had a sponsor again. He bought a hot board from the local shop in Hood River, and he's like, I think this board will be good. And he competed and qualified for the Olympics on a board he bought with cash.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so racing at that time, getting sponsors, was it difficult? Were you competing against a lot of people that were not on the pro team or the A team for the international, for the big companies?
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'd say 2/3 of the field had some sort of like big time summer job or something along those lines, And we're pretty lucky to get product, but would for the most part, get product sponsors and
Yeah.
such. So, and like good guys.
Right.
Rob,
Right.
I don't know if you've heard this name, Rob Burney. And he was a smoke jumper and like an elite smoke jumper in Whitefish, Montana. And there was a whole crew of them actually from there, him and Steve Persons and such. Steve, I think, actually even might have gone to that first games. They were maniacs and just awesome dudes, and they loved snowboarding. And FIS was the only way for them. They had nothing for sponsors, and once they were on the USSA, snowboard team, they were taken care of. Honestly, like Rob Burney, like such a character. If you could ever track him down, he's like leads a fire crew in Alaska on some small island now, or something.
So rad.
All these unsung heroes of snowboarding that someone will listen to this and go, oh yeah, Rob Burney.
I know that guy. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, so sponsor-wise, you're still on Sims at this time, but
Yep.
Sims isn't producing race boards.
It definitely slowed down,
Yeah.
but that model, funny enough, ironically, was called the Burner. It had a bit of a cult following behind it.
Okay.
And so like the kind of the deal was you had to have a product at the games that was accessible commercially. There were no rules on like volumes of that or whatever.
Right.
But I spent a lot of time working on those boards with the engineers at Sims, and I really have to say I had the best equipment going in there.
And where did the power plates come from? Was that something Sims had developed?
So it came from a good friend of mine, Mike Tinkler, and
Okay.
I'd worked with him for years on things, including the old snow sticks, if you remember those. And Tom was a huge fan of snow sticks.
Yes.
Sims actually had inserts in my old pro model board, around 95 and such. They worked well. And actually, if you look on some of the skis today, Solomon and a few other companies have taken them sort of to the next level, sexied them up, but they're out there. Anyway, we wanted to do something a little bit more radical. And so we had, these power plates on there, and the plates were fastened to the board, and then the bindings were fastened to the plate. And we just really wanted to get that separation, isolation. Now they're called like isolation plates. And this was like early days of it. Really just didn't have enough testing time on them. Did they work? Absolutely. But did we put them through the paces of like, okay, they work in fifth gear, do they work in sixth gear?
Right.
Right. And that was really the fault. That was really the weak link of it. Yeah. And for me, mentally, I'm like, oh my God, like these are the things that got me here, was winning a lot with them. We started getting them going really just in that summer of 97 is when we really got them rolling. And then when I just felt, can't take these away from me. Right? There's not an athlete out there now that's competitive that's not on a plate system.
Right. And
if you go to the World Cup, you might find the odd gal just rocking plain bindings on a board. But for the very most part, everyone's on an isolation plate system.
Okay, so we're going into the Olympics. You're confident that you're going to probably podium is kind of like, that's an understatement. I know that Jacoby talked about getting to Nagano, and he felt like people were riding above their pay grade even. Like all of a sudden people were putting stuff on the line that he was like surprised at the level of competition. So leading up to the plate failure, you were in first place. You had the fastest time, is that right? I don't know how this works.
Exactly. Yep. Fastest split time.
Yeah. And the way that they run the races, that means you run last?
So for the first run, it goes off of bib number, and I was bib number 14.
Yep.
And it didn't matter that much, but I actually like better bib numbers. Then what happens is after the first run, and I didn't make it through the first run, but after the first run, the 16th fastest time goes first, and the fastest time goes 16th. And then if you were 17th, you would go then after, then it kind of goes in order of your first run finish time.
Yeah.
And traditionally, my second runs were better. I wouldn't say I put a safety run down, but I'd be like, I'll throw down at 99.5% and see where that puts me. And then if I have to really throttle it out on the second run, I will.
So you're going into the second run really confident.
Didn't make it through the first run.
Oh, wait, you
that
did?
was when it happened.
Shit.
So there was a split time. In other words, what I mean by a split time is there's, I don't remember the exact time of the race, but there's a timing eye halfway down or a little more than halfway down the track, and that's just sort of to give the audience and television viewers, etc., like, oh, here's where they are now, versus everyone else. And it happened a few gates after the split.
Yeah.
And I could see the finish, and it just, I'm sure that's your next question, is like, what did it feel like? What happened? I went into a toe turn, and there was two little chatters, and, you know, we're used to having a couple of chatters, and you just pull the feet back under you and move into the next turn, and it went chat, and I just felt my heel come right up. I just felt it come right up and out. And I remember I was still up, carving even just on the front foot, and in my head, you know, like, the voice went, not now, not now, not now. Can't believe this is happening now. Like, it was an easy, you know, there was so much fencing and stuff there. I just sort of like gently just kept carving and put her into the fence.
And so then at that point, you know, you're not going to podium.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, not to mention, you don't even get a second run. You don't, like, that's it.
That's
done.
The end of it.
No. Yeah. I mean, that would have been it anyway. Even if somehow, if that happened on the second to last turn and I wiggled through with one foot,
yeah,
I still would have been too far out.
Right.
You know, like,
right.
I had respect for everyone else there, but we were riding, Canadian guys, we were riding on. So, like, Ross was our third string guy. From the perspective of training times, et cetera, Ross was our third string guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. JC actually won that first run. So because he got to finish it. We were coming in super stacked, really confident.
Yeah, it could have been
great
first, second,
equipment.
third, right.
So could have had first, second, third.
The Ross thing just eclipsed everything everywhere. The world hadn't recognized snowboarding as a thing yet until that first Olympics. But I spent that whole next year going, okay, you know what? We could have swept it. The guy who should have won, his binding broke. And people, the general public has no idea. They just didn't know. I was like, our guy, our first string guy, we should have had at least first and second. Were you shocked when Ross won it? Like, no offense to him, but like, were you like, oh my God, way to go?
Yeah, I mean, everything was sort of bittersweet there. Like,
yeah.
I would say I contained myself
yeah.
very well. Like, I knew it's like, okay, there's 1,000 cameras on me, this, that, and the other. I'm not about to, like, throw the board in the woods or anything like that, you know?
Right.
I just got to take it, and there it is. There's one down, you know?
Oh, man.
And
yeah.
it was a bit tough, you know? Like, I mean, honestly, and I mean, people will tell you this, but it would have been easier if someone from somewhere else won. You know,
I
not
understand.
And we're in a funny discipline or sport, you know, and this comes from skiing, but where we train together as this team, but it's not a team sport.
Total
You're out there,
individualism.
just because they're wearing a Canadian patch on their shoulder or whatever, like, there's just as much of a competitor as the guy from Russia or the States or Spain, you know?
Sure.
However, like, I feel so strongly you need that environment, that team environment to excel at all.
Right.
You know, because I coach now and I tell my athletes, hey, it's better for one of your teammates to be on the podium, you be fourth, than you being 22nd.
Right.
You know what I mean? So
Totally.
It's an environment to thrive within, is having that solid group of sparring partners and people to push.
After that, like, did you turn the TVs off and just go home, or did you watch that circus that happened?
I didn't watch it. I promised Brenda, or I think it was Brenda, might have been another CBC reporter. I promised them I'd come down to Nagano, regardless of anything, and do an interview that night.
Yeah.
So it would have been midnight in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And I went down and did it, and that was the first time I watched it happen. And she was like, take me through it. I'm like, all right, here it is. Everything's going well, super confident. And yeah, and I like truly was, like, you know, even though I guess I normalized the situation, because I was in the start gate, like, smiling, like, winked at my coach as he took off a little bit earlier. Can't wait, like, let the bull out of the pen here.
Yeah.
Like, truly, honestly confident with everything. You know, I think, you know, just having that, being that committed, that's probably what gave me a sixth gear, which pushed the envelope on the equipment a little bit too.
Yeah.
But anyway, I remember sort of saying all this in the TV interview, and then I'm like, there go the inserts, and, you know, the inserts just ripped right out of the back of the board.
Totally.
And she was like, this is the first time you've seen it? I'm like, yep. And then I, you know, of course, since then watched it a few times and this and that. And, it doesn't do much for me anymore, but then it was. That was a rough night's sleep.
Oh, God, of course,
sleep.
man.
Or, you know, really, really no sleep. And,
right.
Right.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Ross is running back to Canada with his gold medal, and he knows that he's just got tested and that he's going to be going through a whole bunch of bullshit.
That was the thing. So So actually, the next day was a good powder day. So I rocked that.
Nice.
With Darren Chalmers and I had a blast doing that. And
Rad.
there was another funny little piece of perspective there while we were in Nagano. And something that, put just a lot of perspective. There's this kid, a young Burton rider, Jameel Khan. I don't know if you remember that name.
Of course I do, yeah.
And while we were in Nagano is when he lost his life there in Donner Pass. Even though I was a racer and this and the other, like, he was a really good kid. And I don't know, I just really dug chatting with him. It hit a lot of us, for sure. And it definitely, I don't know. It put things in perspective for me where I was like, and the real bummer was he was like inches from being on that Nagano team for the States. Inches. And if he had made it, he'd still be here, you know?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I think in a certain way, from that funny perspective, it sort of helped me be like, it's just another snowboard race. Like, there's worse things out there and there's better things out there.
That's pretty soon to figure that out. I'm glad to hear that. Because, anyone can imagine, years and years of obsessing over it. Like, so close.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds like you're healthy about it. Let's face it, nobody goes to the Olympics statistically out of our society. And then to be the top guy and have an equipment failure, it's just super disappointing. By 2002, you're still competing, you're still at the top of your game. Or are you starting to feel like the next generation is coming up and kicking
it was a bit of a shift, not as much from the athlete pool, but what they did to the disciplines. And they really, they changed what a course looked like. The speed came down, the turns got way more back and forth across the hill. They went more dual format and shorter courses, and basically anything that I had that was sort of like my forte got stripped.
Oh, man.
There was a time there were a lot of pro snowboarders like on the dole, or factory sponsored or getting some sort of small stipend or paycheck and this, that, and the other through about 99.
Yeah.
And in 2000, there was like a really hard line that got dropped around 99, 2000. And tons of people, the pro snowboard pool went from, 400 to 40.
Yeah.
Like really overnight. I barely kind of made it over that bridge. Yeah. And sort of switching equipment, I went from having the best equipment out there and, showing up somewhere with, a room full of boards.
Yeah.
I could have like in 99, I was traveling with like 8 snowboards. I would use a board 6 days and then I would hand it down to the lower team guys.
Wow.
I like the feel of fresh, crisp boards.
Oh, I still do. And,
I remember hearing that there was a tennis player, I forget who it was. He'd go through a couple of rackets a game. And then there were some tennis players, they play with the same racket for a whole year.
Yeah.
And I was one of those guys, I'm like, as soon as it's broken in, I don't want it anymore. Anyway, so going into 2002, like where I said in 98, I was in the start gate and I was like honestly confident. I was not in 2002. And I put it all out there and I was able to like do a run pretty much at the edge of what my equipment and everything could handle, but it wasn't competitive anymore.
Oh, wow.
And looking at like the kid who won on a Kessler, and Kessler was new, but that was the recipe. He had it, and he was at a really strong advantage, and he was using those Northwave boots, and like those guys, the Swiss guys, figured out the equipment. And from 2002 to 2007, they were so dominant.
Wow.
Like they owned it for 5 years without us figuring it.
Oh, man. Is there a North America versus Europe kind of feel?
Yeah, it was funny to track that through the years. And even like the coaches were like, my coach hated the Euros, hated going to Europe. And then it was vice versa. Like Martin Fernandovitz is like, oh yeah, America with your hamburgers and your this and that. And that was the early days, but it really spun around. By the time the Olympics were rolling around, then it was ISF versus FIS.
Right.
And the nation flags went down.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was kind of the whole thing with ISF too, is like we didn't want national teams.
Right.
You snowboarded for yourself or as a pro or what have you on a team.
Right.
But, we really wanted to stay away from those national team uniforms and that whole conformity that was ski racing. And Martin was really he'd be a great guy to talk to. But Martin was really progressive with his thoughts on where we should be taking it. I wish we had listened to him back then.
Right.
You know, we were a little too conservative at the steps we were taking and such, and so he wanted to get rid of speed suits way back when, and we were like, whoa, hold on, like those things actually do something. And he's like, yeah, they make it so we don't have clothing sponsors.
Yeah.
It went in waves, you know, like with the whole, there was definitely, you know, again, if you look, you know, the more near past, that 2002 to 2007 era of like total Swiss domination and stuff, anytime a North American could kind of squeak in there and get a podium or this, that, and the other, it was like a miracle.
Yeah.
And we were totally stoked for each other, you know, genuinely. And it was that.
Yeah.
Now
So
anyone
how
can
did
take
your
it.
career trajectory play out?
So funny enough, after 2002, I knew the games I was going to be it for me for competing. I was just living off life savings and
Right.
bank loans and credit cards, the work. So, you know, it's funny. I remember saying to myself, snowboarding is always a passion, but competing has gone from a passion to a bad habit. You know, like as soon as it went from like, I'm actually making a living doing this and loving it, to holy shit, like am I going to be able to pay the credit card or whatever? Like, how much debt am I going to go into doing this? Like, and I'm not winning. And it started tasting sour.
Right.
Started to taste sour for me. So in 2002, my friend up here actually from Lake Tahoe, and prior to that, we kept talking about this cat ski operation he wanted to start in Nelson. I said, after the games, I'll come, regardless of how I do, I'll come see you. I'll come up to Nelson and check it out. So immediately following the Olympics, Salt Lake, I drove to Tahoe, had like one or two big powder days there.
Brad.
Because it dumped. Drove to Bend, called Jerry Lopez, had like full waist deep with Jerry Lopez at Bachelor.
Beautiful.
And then drove up here. And that would have been, it was sort of mid-March 2002. And yeah, I was planning on staying for 2-3 days and then going back down to Tahoe, figure out what the hell I wanted to do with my life. And lo and behold, it was lift your arms up, shoulder deep powder here for 2 weeks straight.
Oh,
and I was like, I had free reign with Jeff, like on the cat skiing at Baldface. Now, there wasn't even a lodge then. At that point, we take the boat across every day. And Craig was here, so I rode with Craig a bunch. Met John Buffrey, and it was just like, oh my God, this place is absolutely amazing. And John Buffrey suggested, he's like, what are you doing next year? I'm like, I don't know. He's like, you should come up here. There's a bunch of young dudes like yourself that are just getting into guiding and such, and you should come do that. I was like, I'll be there.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a really interesting time in my life, I guess. I'd been married, in 99, divorced by 2001. Great gal, just didn't work, full young starter marriage. So subsequent to coming up here and this Baldface thing, it was amazing. I went on a Costa Rica trip with like Kelly Clark and Maël Ricker, Chris Klug, Anton Pogue. Had a blast. Immediately following that, went back to New Brunswick to visit my parents and ran into this gorgeous gal who I went to high school with and who's now my wife.
Nice. That's amazing.
And so, yeah, I went from being like this pro snowboard guy to like having a girlfriend. She has a son, my stepson, who at the time was 7. It was a wild time. And then I also got a gig with, if you remember the little TV show Sacred Ride. So I was hosting Sacred Ride with Tara Tagan, sometimes Brett Tippie. That was arguably the most fun gig ever.
Oh, that
was awesome. Things kind of almost went too quick, to be honest, but at least all in a positive direction, And from 2002 to 2003, 2004, into 2005, then I got the call from JC and the Canada Snowboard they wanted me to come coach them for a year.
That's pretty tight. Was that, and were you happy to be back out there in that environment that you spent so much of your adult life in?
It's funny, I didn't expect I would make that move. They dangled a nice carrot, and I bit. And I said to my wife and myself, I'm like, I'll just do this for like a year and then go back to like guiding and still being entrenched in snowboarding and working with, I had was trying to fire up building boards. Yeah, I didn't expect it. And I certainly didn't expect that I'd still be coaching now. 12 years later, I'm still doing it. But I was certainly comfortable with it. It was an environment I knew very, very well, and I knew the players, and I knew how it all worked. So it was great. It was great. And
awesome.
I kind of had a little bit of a like chip on my shoulder, like, oh, we still got a medal to win. You know, there's still one in there. There's still kind of one in there for me.
Yeah.
And we really, going into 2006, just didn't have enough time to get the stars lining up with the crew. And then for 2010, it was like, all right, we got the support. You know, like the Own the Podium thing was incredible. I wish we had that, you know, going into Salt Lake. If you needed something, we could get it.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. So again, going into 2010, Canada Snowboard Team had the best guys, the best equipment.
Rad.
And we had 3 guys winning that year. So we, you know, no problem. And JC pulled it off.
Yeah, they have a run named after him at Cypress. I think I might have rode it with Brett Tippy this year. He's so fun.
Nice. Oh, he's awesome. I loved Tippy. First time I met Tippy was at that Copper Mountain Super G event that I won.
Oh, amazing.
That was the first time I met Tippy.
Yeah, he's such a character, hey? Man, I'm so glad. When I actually heard your name this year, the Burton rep, Steve Hare, I forget where he was riding with you.
We put together a little thing on the ride, I think we called it, and it was, just did some split boarding around here. Cruising around.
Right, that's it. And when he mentioned your name, I was like, I have to interview that guy. His story's going to be so good. And it is.
So my daughter is 11.
Yep.
And she's insanely persistent, annoyingly persistent, and cracks my wife and I all the time. We just crack and give in.
Yeah.
And sadly, I'm sure that's exactly what I did to them there at Carabasset Valley Academy. Like I wasn't taking no for an answer. Zero humility. And thank God it kind of worked out. Seth Westcott.
Yep.
Seth Westcott is a graduate from there. Jeff Greenwood. Yeah, there's a bunch. Snowboarders, of course, a bunch of ski racers too. But
all right, Mark. Well, thank you so much. Is there anyone you want to give shout-outs to?
All the people in the early days giving me those opportunities, you know. So, like a Malcolm Norman, Tom Sims, Gayleen Nagel. She was a real mastermind behind the marketing of Sims in its heyday. Other sponsors. Lisa Hudson was super supportive back in the day when I was riding on the swag clothing. Yeah, the engineers back in the day too, and I was a real pain in the ass with them. I've actually literally have gone to them and apologized. I am so sorry I was such a dick and so demanding, and so like Lars Pack and John Moore, Scott Rouse, Max von Marbod. He was a great supporter at the final days of Sims. A lot of us left all at the same time, actually. Right. Well, I don't know, one of Tom's sideways sales deals. That poor company changed hands so many times, you know.
Totally.
My old coach, Jerry, amazing. All those old sparring partners, of course, Jeremy, Adam Hofstetter. Like, there's a book's worth of adventures with those two guys. Holy shit. Like, unbelievable stories. I mean, Jeremy's got all these snowboard stories post-98. He probably has twice as many pre-98. Yeah, JC, it's almost like a different life ago when I was an athlete and then a coach. And so, you know, all the people that I got to work with and Canada Snowboard. This is kind of funny. You know, I was so anti-FIS for all those years, and then I ended up working for like a FIS-affiliated national snowboard organization for like years and years. So yeah, that'd pretty much do it. And then now, of course, I work with the Paralympic movement, and I'd have to say, of all the cool, bloody things you can do on a snowboard, one of the neatest things I've ever seen a snowboard do is patch up a physical impairment on someone. So there's athletes that, you know, have a amputation on one side or a severe impairment on one, you know, in one leg, etc., and they snowboard flawlessly. It'd take them a minute to run 100 meters, like literally, and they snowboard flawlessly. It's cool. Been really happy to be part of that for a couple of years now, and we run bank slalom and head-to-head border cross.
Rad. Awesome. Well, thanks again. It was really great chatting with you.
Cool.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Man.
Well, I'm glad to help.
FNRad shout out to Mark Fawcett for doing the interview. Thank you very much, dude. And special thanks to Trains Going Past for leaving us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Trains Going Past, get in touch with us on the Facebook page or in our Instagram feed, and we'll send you out something from Vans. Also, I'm going to send something to Ryan Baker and Brent Dudley for leaving 5-star reviews on the FNRad Snowboarding Podcast Facebook page. Thanks for that, guys. Anson, thanks for driving us to Manning Park this week. That was a lot of fun. And Gordy, thanks for being our #1 fan, dude. It was great talking to you on the chairlift, and it's always fun, bro. Follow us on Instagram, like our Facebook page, listen to the Man Boys podcast. Check those guys out. I've been listening to them, and they're really, really good. And yeah, make sure you come back next week for another episode of the FNRad Snowboarding Podcast, brought to you by BR Productions.